Evening everyone. So today we're going to be creating a really quick kinetic typography sequence in After Effects, and this is following on from last week's lesson as well. So first things first, I've just created a new composition with the following settings. So it's 1080-25, 25 frames, 10 seconds with a black background, and here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is go into New and Solid, and we're just going to make this a nice dark grey solid, like so, or medium grey. We're going to make it comp size, and I'm just going to call this rectangle 1, and then I'm going to hit OK. And I'm just going to drag this down to about here, resize it slightly. It's important to resize it as we're going to be rotating this to this bottom corner and we don't want it to fall off the screen. Okay, now I'm going to jump straight into New and Text, and I'm going to just type Kinetic Typography. And at this point, it'd be good to choose a font. I'm going with Helvetica. It's a nice, clean sans font. Oh, wrong button. Double-clicking the typography, kinetic typography layer. I'm just going to resize this, so it's about 50 pixels. And regular is fine. I'm just hitting V on the keyboard to bring about my selection tool, and I'm just going to move this over here. So we don't want it to overlap the grey too much. That should be fine. Okay, so with the kinetic typography selected, I'm just going to drop down the options here, drop down the text options and click on this animate button, and I'm going to animate the opacity. Now, depending on which animation you've selected, you'll get the range selector and the main parameter for that. So I'm just going to change the opacity to 0%, drop down range selector, hit the stopwatch on start. This creates our first keyframe, and I want this to keyframe over about a second, and I'm just going to increase this to 100. So now our animation looks like so. However, I don't want the characters to come in, so I'm just going to change this to words. So instead it fades in word by word. Happy days. Okay, so that's how I want the kinetic typography to look, and I'm just going to move this higher. Okay, so hitting U on the keyboard, I can have a look at those keyframes, and that's important so I can start to think about how I want this to play out. And I'm just going to easy ease these keyframes as well. So it's F9 on the keyboard, or if you're on a Mac, it's the FN button and F9. I'm going to easy ease these keyframes in. So at this point now I want both of these to rotate, and this is where I'm going to add a bit of movement to this kinetic typography. Now to do that, the best way to do it is to create a null object, and what we're going to do is make the null object a controller. So a controller, I'm just going to controller 1. So effectively what we can do is now move this null object over here with our kinetic typography. And now what we're going to do is select both these layers, grab the pick whip, and it's going to, because we've selected both layers by holding shift and selecting them both, we can just drag one of the pick whips, and because we've got both of these selected, you can see here now it's attached them both to controller 1. Now controllers are great because now I can hit R on the keyboard, I can set a keyframe here and rotate both of our layers at the same time. So we want this to happen gradually, so I'm going to say about this speed, and I'm just going to easy ease this last keyframe so we get something like this. Lovely. Okay, so controller 1 collapsed. I'm just going to jump back over to kinetic typography, and as our platform descends like so, I want kinetic typography to start sliding. So I'm just going to hit P on the keyboard to bring up position. I'm going to keyframe the position at this point, and I can move this keyframe back a little bit at this point because ultimately we've got to create the animation, and when the platform is completely level, your typography wouldn't slide. However, we have chosen a point where it is completely rotated, and for that reason we're going to add the animation of this kinetic typography sliding. So with this first parameter selected here, I'm just going to drag this to the right hand side until my text is off screen, and then we're just going to hit play and see how that looks. Okay, so something's happening. It's a little bit too fast. I'm just going to ease these by, again, selecting both keyframes, holding FN, pressing F9. Okay, so this is happening a little bit too slow. So as this starts to slide, I actually want the keyframe to start there and maybe go around there. Brilliant, that's a bit better. Happy days. Okay, so as this is happening like so. Okay, so what I want to happen now is another piece of text to start up here and come into screen as this one slides off screen. So to do this, I'm just going to duplicate this kinetic typography and open up, just press U on the keyboard to bring up the positions. And at this point, I'm just going to grab these two keyframes, which are duplicated to mimic the original animation that we just made, and I'm going to move these over here. So as this falls off screen, at this point, our new typography is appearing here. So again, at this point, we want this to start off screen. So I'm just going to move it back here, and this is going to come in, and we don't want it to stop there. So I'm just going to again move my cursor over this keyframe, and I'm going to move this back as well. So we want it to kind of stop around here. So let's see how this is looking. Okay, so a little bit slow, and that's because of just going to delete that, and let's see how this is looking. Okay, so a little bit of alterations. So it is a lot of this is just playing around until you get something you're happy with. I'm not happy with either of these, so I am just going to start from there, and I'm going to re-keyframe these because I think there was a little bit of lag happening. So I want this to stop there. Ease these two in. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so this is what we've got so far. That's better. Okay, so with this second text layer, I'm just going to change this to something like so. So now we have Kinetic Typography helps tell a story. Now at this point we want to go back into controller settings, because as we can see this text stops, and as it stops I would like the platform to go back level. So if we drop down the rotation options, so what we're going to do is duplicate this parameter by pressing this button here, and we're just going to move this up here very slightly, and now we're just going to hit 0 and we're going to snap back into place. And I'm just going to move these two away from each other, so we'll need to do a little bit, I'm assuming, but let's see how that's looking. Okay, so I'm just going to now move these further down. Okay, now it's looking better. Looking worse. Better, okay. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So all we're doing is using the same techniques, but we're just changing the way that the text animates in to give it this kinetic feel to it. So we're going to get a little bit more advanced. And so to do that, I'm going to keep these settings here, but duplicate rectangle 1 and just move this above controller 1. And this time round, I'm going to drag it and move it above here, like so. And I'm just going to turn off the controller because we don't want to use controller 1 settings. So we should see these are doing their own thing, and our second grey rectangle is just kind of chilling above it there, which is fine. So what I'm going to do at this point is just add some more text in here, and I'm not going to worry at this point about what this text is doing. You'll see why in just a second. So what can we write next? What tells a story and makes the video more dynamic? Exclamation mark. Right, okay, so that's the text, and I'm just going to hit V on the keyboard, bring this up here, line it all up a little bit. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to I'm going to add an animation to this, and the animation is going to be slightly different. I'm going to do the position animation, and I want the video, in a second this box and the text is going to knock this text and box out of the shot. It's going to knock it downwards and out of the shot. So I want the box to look like it's being animated by the weight of the words dropping down, which is what's creating the movement. So to do that, I can go to the range selector, looking at position. I'm going to move the parameter so that it starts way up here. Now I'm going to go a little bit higher than the timeline, and that's just so that I get a little bit more room to work with. You can adjust this at a later stage as well. And again, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to start our keyframe here, and we're going to end it around about here. And so you can see what happens here. The characters drop in from the top. Now we don't want that, so again we want to do this by word. So I'm just going to click Advanced, change it from characters to words, and now we should have the words falling in one at a time. Now that's too fast, so again I'm just going to move these keyframes further away from each other so that happens gradually, and I'm going to easy ease them in as well, so we get that. Okay, so again, here we're going to create another controller, so I'm just going to create a new null object, and we're going to call this null object controller 2. And you'll notice I'm putting the controllers above the layers which they are going to be in charge of, and that just helps manage the workspace that we've got here. We could pre-compose these, but I'm not going to do that in today's lesson. So I'm being mindful to keep my cursor there because that's the timing. With our controller 2, I'm just going to grab this and move it up here in center of these two areas. And we need to dynamically link, parent those two layers to controller 2. So now we can start to think of pacing. So helps tell a story stops there, and as the first character smacks down there, so I'm going to stop there, hit P on controller 2 for position. I'm just going to keyframe that in there and move it down, so as soon as the and hits the box, this is when our animation is going to come down and it's going to bash those out of the way. Now, as that bashes the top box, our controller 1, we also need to now keyframe the position so that it is also being moved off screen, like so. So let's just see how that's looking. It's going to not look great because we've got to still do the refined animation, but here we go. Yeah, too fast. So, and pops down, and we can see there that it actually can't catch up to the box. It's all moving too fast. So we're going to move this further down there, and we're going to move this, and we're just going to ease keyframe these in. And we're going to ease keyframe these to match. Okay, so it kind of looks like the way that it moves is almost like two magnets. When they get close to each other, they sort of push each other out of the way. I don't want it to be as magnetized, so I'm just going to adjust the way that this animates out of the way so it looks like it bangs it like so. Now we could refine this animation a little bit more, but for the speed of this tutorial, I'm just sort of getting through it quickly so that you can have more of a play with your practice. So I'm not really happy with the position of this, so I'm just going to move this a bit higher there. And again, because we're animating the null object, you can change around your text like so, and it's not going to mess around with the keyframes that you've made for the position, which is another reason why nulls are quite good. Okay, so I'm going to stop in just a second, but hopefully this is giving you a really good idea as to how you can play around with kinetic typography and shapes and controllers to make something which, you know, could be achieved by just fading in the text, but this makes it a little bit more engaging and interesting. So this is where I'm going to stop the tutorial, and hopefully you found it useful, and yeah, create your own version of a kinetic typography sequence, and I'd like to see what you can create. Thank you very much, guys.